I think that volatility is going to increase dramatically in the days ahead. I think oil will go well north of $100 a barrel. Again, it's back to what are you producing with that barrel of oil? Where does it fit into the various economies that depend upon access to the Straits of Hormuz and tankers? I think we're just at the beginning. And, we know what that means when you go over $100 in oil. It's going to have an impact on inflation and a whole series of other markets. Now, it's not about oil, but yet it is, because the suspicion is, and I think this is probably accurate, that the Israelis and the Americans want to do to Iran what we have failed to be able to do to Russia. In other words, we wanted to destroy Russia, sadly, stupidly, and we tried to do that by using Ukraine. The Ukrainians have lost 1.5 to 1.8 million Ukrainian soldiers, far more than anybody in Western Europe will admit, or in Washington. The Ukrainian nation is destroyed. I don't even know if that place will survive the war. The war isn't over, but it's pretty damn close to being over militarily. It's just a question of the Russians moving forward. I think they will. I think they'll take Odessa. I think they'll take Kharkov. These are historic Russian cities. And if they still get no satisfaction in terms of negotiating partners in Europe, I think they'll move into Kiev.
$4 Middle East contract, U.S., they get it. It goes from the wellhead to a processing facility, to a pipeline, to an LNG facility, onto a tanker. And if it's supposed to be there Wednesday, it's there Wednesday. There's a lot to be said for being a reliable. We can't rest on our laurels.
Right.
At some point in time, that Russian gas is going to be available to the market again. Qatar, which controls the largest natural gas field in the world, is busy building export trains and setting up stable supply agreements, including pricing agreements, with countries around the world. The Northwest Shelf of Australia is developing an LNG hub. Mozambique is developing an LNG hub, and the Canadians have what's called line pack, which is to say they produce more gas than they can actually transport. So the U.S. should not rest on its laurels. And the U.S. should also not underestimate the increasing bad will. That's the only way it's going to work. But there's going to be 10 years to get there.
Yeah.
And while we wait to get there, we are going to need the ability to burn natural gas to generate electricity where periodic demands exceed the supply of other forms of energy. We're going to need that. You're going to need it particularly in the state that you just fled, California, which has fairly high baseload demand and has done their best to shut in supply throughout the state. What you're going to find is that the California grid is going to be increasingly unstable. Reliance on solar in much of California is not a bad idea, except it has problems at night when the sun doesn't shine. And periods like that are going to be supplied increasingly by a California-centric problem or an American problem. But the truth is that the world needs more of all forms of energy. Remember, too, that natural gas isn't just used for energy. It's used for petrochemicals. Natural gas is a critical component of nitrogenous fertilizers. So to the extent that we want to eat, which most of us do, there is a necessity that nitrogen generated from natural gas be available. To the extent that we don't want our food to spoil, which most of us want, the petrochemicals like plastics, there are a whole bunch of utilities around natural gas that don't involve burning it.
And root the government out permanently. I also know that morale in Western Ukraine is terrible. People there want an end to the war. The only way this regime in Kiev is holding itself together is with Stalinist methods. They have their own NKVD, and that's why they continue to operate. Otherwise, they'd long since gone out of business. And because MI6, the CIA, and Mossad are all involved in trying to keep the terminal patient that's already on the table dying alive. So I think if you take that seriously, then you know that Iran's oil jugular is very important, and it's probably the easiest thing for us to move into and take, because it's in the west and the north of the country. I think the hope is that Iran will fall apart. If it falls apart, then the Israelis can move into the area along with help from us and take control of the oil resources. I'm waiting for something to happen to Karg Island, which is the large oil terminal from which most of it's dispensed. Hasn't happened yet, but I think something will. Obviously, I think we would like to capture that intact. Now, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think that Iran is going to fall apart. And I think the Russians and the Chinese have already demonstrated in how they helped Iran recently in January of their determination to keep this state from falling apart. And the Turks have too. So you've already seen evidence of Turkish willingness to support their neighbor because the Turks don't want Iran to fall apart. If Iran falls apart, millions of refugees cross the border, start pouring into Turkey, the Middle East, and then ultimately into Europe. No one in their right mind wants that to happen. So I already see this sort of Islamic unspoken alliance hardening in support of it. You also have the Saudis that don't want to be dragged into the war. Some of their facilities have been attacked, but not by the Iranians. It looks as though these are false flags created by Israelis. And this has already happened in Qatar as well. And remember, Saudi Arabia is very close to Pakistan, as is Turkey. The Pakistanis have always promised the Turks nuclear warheads for their missiles if they need it. That's one of the reasons that Mr. Erdogan has warned the Israelis repeatedly, we're not afraid of you. All of these things are very dangerous. We don't want any of this to happen. But no one in the Trump administration sat down and went through the calculus to figure out where this could go. So now this thing is beginning to spiral out of control. Question is, how rapidly and how far? And you can predict anything you want. We're now boasting that we sank an Iranian ship off the coast of Ceylon. What difference does that make? If you look at the missiles and drones that Iran has built, they've demonstrated they don't need an air force or a navy. That's how profound the change in technology has become. And I thought we had learned that in the war with Russia. You know, initially the Russians were surprised. They reorganized, they re-equipped, they built up, and they smashed their opponents to the point where there's almost nothing left. The only thing the Ukrainians can do is launch some drones and occasional missiles we give them. But the point is we should have seen that kind of warfare and understood the limits to our own capabilities, because the military establishment that the U.S. has fielded was designed for the Cold War. It was designed for some version of World War II. That's not what we're confronting, and that's not what we're going to confront in the future. So all of these things are wrapped up together. And again, I don't think there's an easy answer except that this is going to go on for some time, and oil is going to skyrocket. It's going to hit the roof. Now, let's pause a minute. It's not just oil. I think you're going to see everything increase in price. I think coal is going to rise dramatically. All of your precious metals. And frankly, if it comes out of the ground, it's going to be immensely valuable in the future. Food is going to be immensely valuable. It's going to become more expensive and more difficult to acquire because the opportunity to use the fertilizers that produce the green revolution has been narrowed. You know, Russia and Ukraine were huge producers of fertilizer as well as food. But when it comes to precious metals, I mean, everyone should understand right now, if you don't own a lot of it and haven't invested in it, whether it's silver and gold and other things, well, you're not just late to the party, you're probably going to be priced out of everything. And it's not just the precious metals. What about the industries that produce the materials with which we mine? You know, everything from piping to plastic utility, you name it, everything that is connected with the process of mining and
It is true that most of the uses we have for it involve burning it, and we and or our customers, particularly in cold places, that if technologies around those data centers don't improve to make them more energy efficient, and that's what I think is going to happen,
Yep.
that the only way that we are going to be able to sustain the voracious demand for electricity in what is an already overstressed grid is going to be nuclear power. But Adam, we're going to need to do a lot of stuff in this country. We've made a political decision to favor things like wind and solar. That's okay, except for when the sun doesn't shine in the window. Interestingly, by CITIC, the Chinese Sovereign Wealth Fund, that the United States needs to invest $8 trillion in upgrading their, as the grid becomes interdependent, what happens is that the grid itself becomes a battery. You can move the power from where it isn't needed to where it is needed and use it more efficiently. But we haven't invested in the grid substantially since 1950. We're going to need to do that. And technologies that make data acquisition and generation more energy efficient, the only way out is a nuclear build out, or that all of those people will be accommodated into the global economy in 20 years, which means that the growth that you've seen, which has led to 700 million people being accepted into the global economy, has more to go. The Chinese also, despite being allegedly a communist country, have what is for investors a very attractive tax code. The consequence of that is that China continues to be in investments in the United States, particularly if given that the local administration in a Chinese municipality might approve that factory in our contract with the municipality. Fate of the former mayor of Chongqing, who wasn't in fact thrown in prison, utilized the resources that those countries control in an annuity-like fashion for 20 years or 25 years. Equitable is a play on the Marcellus Shale in the northeastern part of the U.S., the Marcellus backing Canadian gas out of that market. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Nothing in their way.
What you just watched featured two voices that rarely appear together. Douglas Macgregor, a retired U.S. Army colonel and geopolitical strategist, and Rick Rule, one of the most respected commodity investors in the world. Different backgrounds, different expertise. But when you listen carefully, they are converging on the same conclusion. Both men start with energy, and both treat it not as a market story, but as a geopolitical weapon. Macgregor sees the Strait of Hormuz as the next major pressure point. Any serious escalation around Iran's oil infrastructure, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows, sends energy prices into territory that destabilizes every economy on Earth. Rule agrees. He states directly that oil is going well north of $100 a barrel. And when that happens, inflation follows. Supply chains tighten. The cost of everything moves higher. This is their shared starting point. Energy is no longer just an economic variable. It is the lever that connects military conflict to your cost of living. The second point of convergence is deeper. Both men believe the world has been dangerously underinvesting in the infrastructure that keeps modern civilization running. Rule points to the U.S. electricity grid largely unchanged since 1950, and argues it needs approximately $8 trillion in upgrades just to meet current and near-future demand. He also highlights that natural gas is not just fuel. It is the raw material for fertilizers that feed billions of people. Cut the supply, and you don't just raise electricity bills. You raise food prices globally. Macgregor frames the same problem from the military side. Decades of strategic miscalculation have left Western institutions overextended and underprepared for the kind of asymmetric, technology-driven conflict now defining the modern battlefield. Both are saying the same thing in different languages. The systems we depend on were built for a world that no longer exists. When you combine Macgregor's geopolitical read with Rule's market analysis, the investment conclusion is hard to ignore. Structural instability plus rising demand plus years of underinvestment points in one direction: real assets, gold, silver, energy, natural resources. Rule puts it plainly: everything that comes out of the ground is positioned to become significantly more valuable. Not because of speculation, because the math demands it. These are serious analysts making serious arguments. The forces they are describing are real and already in motion. The only question is whether you are paying attention before the rest of the market catches up. What do you think? Are we at the beginning of a major commodity supercycle? Drop your view in the comments. And if this kind of analysis is what you come here for, make sure you are subscribed.